It's नमस्कार, मैं दिव्यांशी आप सभी का स्वागत करती हूँ प्रथा में। Pratha, social media offshoot of Kavya. And in today's interview session, we have a very special guest, Ms. Deepali Kulkarni, Director of Human Rights, Hindu American Foundation. It is the first major national advocacy group in USA looking at Hindu identity. And today, we'll be discussing about the topic Kashmiri Hindu genocide and exodus, reconciliation and ignorance. सन 90 के दशक में सैकड़ों कश्मीरी पंडित मारे गए जो गोलियों से नहीं मरे वो वंस्थापन के दर्द से मारे गए 30 साल पहले चली एक ऐसी दहशतगर्द की आंधी जो आज तक घरों को दोबारा बसा नहीं सकी है एक खौफ जिसने पूरी कश्मीरी घाटी को अपने बस में ले लिया तो चलिए आज इसी पर बात करेंगे मिस दीपाली कुलकर्णी जी से मैम the very first question is what led to the circumstances of 1990 Kashmiri Hindu genocides?
Namaste. Thanks so much for having me. I think this question of ethnic cleansing, I wouldn't call it a genocide exactly, in 1990 is very, very complex. But in short, there was a Pakistan proxy war in Kashmir. And suddenly, overnight, so many extremist forces had sprouted in Kashmir, where actually before that, Hindus and Muslims were living peacefully together. These external extremist forces came and created an environment where Muslims felt obligated to participate in extremist activity, otherwise they themselves would be in danger. So what happened during this ethnic cleansing period, and the reason I call it ethnic cleansing is because genocide, although this does fit the technical definition of genocide, to try to rid, in whole or in part, an entire community from its land. This is something that we'll call ethnic cleansing for the time being, because so far there hasn't been very much recognition of the situation itself. And when we use the word genocide, a lot of times it can seem alarmist, and then people will be less likely to take these issues seriously. But the fact that this was ethnic cleansing, trying to remove Kashmiri Pandits from Kashmir, is a fact. These were the indigenous people of that land. And although today Kashmir is majority Muslim and the largest minority is Hindu, at one time it was actually majority Hindu and Buddhist, and later it was ruled not only by Muslim rulers but also by Sikh rulers. So the situation of Kashmir has changed over time. Now, Kashmir at 1947 legally acceded to India, and but still that area was considered contested by Pakistan. Pakistan was trying to encroach on that territory. So 1948, India brought this issue to the United Nations, and the UN passed Resolution 47, which asked for a few different things and a plebiscite to be held, which basically means that the people of Kashmir would be able to vote on what country they wanted to be a part of, which is definitely would have been a wonderful thing had it happened at that time. It didn't end up happening for several reasons, one of which was the Pakistan government didn't withdraw its troops from the region. In fact, it increased its military presence there. So this is a complex issue, and a lot of times it's certainly glazed over because people view it as an issue of identity. But if you look at the facts, it's actually very simple. There are extremist forces that were galvanized by the Pakistan military and were brought there to try and take control of that land. And so in 1990, over 350,000 Kashmiri Pandits were forced to leave under the threat of death. And they said, if you don't leave, we'll start with your children. They're, calling out these threats all over the land through these loudspeakers. You could hear these threats. And in the beginning, they were in Urdu. But then slowly they started to happen in Kashmiri. And that's when people really became afraid, because it wasn't just these foreigners who had nothing to do with them that were saying these things that were violent, yes, but it wasn't their people. But when it was in Kashmiri, all of a sudden the neighbors, their long-term friends, people you would consider family, had turned against them. And that's when it really became a horrible situation where, a tremendous amount of violence was exacted among the Hindus in Kashmir.
Ms. Kulkarni, you yourself is an human rights activist. So my next question is, what has been the role of global human rights activists in highlighting the grievances of Kashmiri Pandits to the authorities in power? And the second part of it is, to what extent they have succeeded in highlighting the grievances?
Yeah, I think there's many Kashmiri organizations in the US. We have many Kashmiri Hindu American organizations that are working hard on this issue. Actually, it's the activists that brought this to the attention. The plight of 1990 brought it to the attention of the international community, because at the time in 1990, when this was happening, the Indian government had not quickly intervened. They had not taken swift action to put an end to this ethnic cleansing. But by being slow to respond and by neglecting to actually successfully help the refugees, the Kashmiri refugees in their own country, they created a vacuum, and activists around the world, Kashmiri Hindu activists, filled that vacuum by making sure that this was not forgotten. And still today, they're working very hard on this issue. Whatever we know about this issue is thanks to Kashmiri Hindu activists.
Definitely, and we thank the human rights activists, because that was an issue that has been highlighted and kept really in power for a very long time because of the activist. Uh,
Absolutely.
Ma'am, we would like you to please describe the events that went on after 1990 and the horrors that were faced by Kashmiri Pandits.
Yeah, I mean, when we describe the horrors that they faced in terms of being told to leave, or we're going to, leave or face death, those are the only options. We can imagine that happening to us today, and somebody asking you to leave because of the religion that you practice. It's truly, that itself is horrifying. But it wasn't just asking people to leave. That wasn't the only horror that the Hindus, Pandits at the time faced. In fact, there was many Hindus that were killed and tortured during that time. This includes the rape of women and the tortured and killing and display of bodies of Hindu Kashmiris to illustrate the consequences of not following the instructions they were given. And I've talked to, if you go to the our hinduamerican.org website, you'll see on the page where it says about Hindus and Hinduism, and then you can go to HAF, That's So Hindu podcast. You'll see soon a interview with Vijay Sazawal, who's a Kashmiri Hindu American, and he recalls a situation where his parents were reluctant to leave. They really wanted to stay. That was their home, but their neighbors, and a teenager came to threaten him. And the first time he came to threaten him, his father, he was not, super concerned. But then when he came the next day again with a gun to say, no, you must pay the taxes for safety, right? There's this idea that, you have to earn your right to be there. They're trying to make it so either by forcing them to leave under the threat of death, torture and killings, and this, it created a forced expulsion out of this sacred indigenous land that was indigenous to this community. And it was really a situation which has been overlooked by the international community, but also, to be truthful, the Indian community, not only internationally, but in India itself.
Absolutely. And ma'am, when you were describing a story of how teenager boy just went to the neighbors and were asking to leave or gain the rights to live, I guess this is just one story of thousands of story that have been there at that time.
Absolutely.
Ma'am, you've been describing about the ethnic cleansing. So I would want you to please shed a little more light on the scenarios that have led to this ethnical cleansing.
Yeah, so I described a little bit about the scenarios that led to the ethnic cleansing, specifically that um, Kashmir was at different times, Pakistan became interested in it and then wanted to take over
I
that land.
guess I'm sorry to interrupt. I guess there is some network issue. Can you please repeat that question? About that
That
answer. Yeah.
yeah, absolutely. My apologies. So essentially, like I said, Kashmir legally acceded to India in 1947, and Pakistan had a lot of military presence in Kashmir, and so India went to the United Nations, and which is something countries can do when it's an issue that will affect international peace, which it certainly would. There's two wars, that India and Pakistan have fought just for this issue. Um, so it was something within the mandate of the United Nations to actually address. So India went to the United Nations and the UN passed Resolution 47. So there are several things that are important to consider in Resolution 47. One of them is that essentially there's the Pakistan would have to withdraw its military presence. And actually, what ended up happening is Pakistan increased its military presence in the region. There's in the UNSC resolution of January 1949, there were specifically two clauses which I'd like to reach out. Basically, it was a caveat that all of this can be in place if minorities in all parts of the states are accorded adequate protection and there is no victimization. However, as we very well know, this violence has continued till the present day. This is not just a historical issue, it's an issue of ongoing violence. If you just, take a look into the news, you'll see that prominent Kashmiri Hindus have been killed just in 2021 in order to intimidate the Kashmiri Hindu population that remains in the region and uh, to essentially intimidate and what's the word I'm looking for? Prevent any Kashmiri Hindus that had to become refugees in India to deter them from thinking that it would be a good idea to return. And so they certainly have been able to do this, these extremist factions, through this terrorist activity. They've been able to intimidate the Kashmiri Hindu population and deter Kashmiri Hindus from returning to their homeland. And this is something which continues to escape international attention. And in fact, this is not in direct response to your question, but I should mention there's a lot of discussion as if this is a land that's somehow irrelevant to the country of India. And that itself is a ridiculous idea. If you look at the diverse history of Jammu and Kashmir, that the idea that it isn't part of India is absolutely absurd. But the reality is that it is part of India, and it's a very complex issue, but it's complex because of partition. It's complex because of the ways in which Pakistan had created military presence there. And it's complex because the international community isn't able to address the issues as they are, but often in the United Nations and elsewhere, rhetoric is taking place of actually looking at the facts as they stand. And that's a very unfortunate reality that we're facing today.
Definitely, ma'am. And as you are quoting that, it's a very complex issue, ma'am. The evolving history of Kashmir itself is very complex. If we talk about it has Hindu rulers, and then it was dominated by Sanatan, Buddhism, Shaivism, and then it was by Sikh rulers, and then somehow it was invaded by Muslims. So it has a very, very diverse history. But yes, now coming back to the question. Ma'am, you have talked to a lot of Kashmiri people after 1990. You have closely worked with them. So, ma'am, definitely even imagining about living as a migrant in their own nation is itself very devastating. Ma'am, how has their life changed after 1990? Have they able to resettle themselves?
Yeah, I think Kashmiri Hindus have definitely found success wherever they go. As a community, they're very resilient, but it's unfortunate that there wasn't more help from not only the Indian government, whose responsibility it is to take care of its refugees, not only then, but now as well. Certainly, there are many Hindu and other refugees from other religions, Sikh, Buddhist, and so on, that Indian government has a responsibility to take care of in its own country. And I'm just speaking about that as a Hindu. Internationally, the Kashmiri Hindu population has been able to see a tremendous amount of success due to their own hard work and due to their own faith and bhakti. They've been able to overcome tremendous odds. So overall, the support from the Indian government hasn't always been there, as far as I can see. And still today, there's much more support warranted, not only for Kashmiri Hindu refugees, and this is something that, they became refugees decades back, but refugees here today, I must say, in India. I'm currently in India, that's why I'm saying here. Um, uh, Hindus in India must be protected as when they come as refugees. They're refugees of other religious communities who still don't have citizenship, despite having that right. So under the Citizenship Amendment Act, the original one, not the 2019 one. So there's a lot more I could say about that. Definitely go to hinduamerican.org and try and look, and I encourage the young people of India to learn more about this. Recently, I came on a fact-finding mission to India to interact with Hindu refugees, so I must speak out for them now.
Definitely, and it's a very sensitive issue also when we talk about again rehabilitation of Kashmiri Pandits back to the valley. I would like, Ms. Kulkarni, I would like to ask you. With revocation of Article 370 and 35A, do you think that it has paved the way for repatriation of Kashmiri Pandits?
Yeah, I think that's an interesting question. So it's possible that it'll help Kashmiri Hindus to go back to Kashmir, but in terms of repatriation, in terms of becoming part of India, Kashmir has always, it is for such a long time been a part of India, and it's because of India's support in fighting extremism there that the region has been able, that the state of Jammu and Kashmir has been able to see the success that it does have. I think with Articles 370 and 35A, the abrogation or revoking of these articles, which gave Kashmir this kind of semi-autonomous status, the biggest value I see in that is the protection of women, the protection of the LGBTQ community, because many of the laws in India that would protect people that would otherwise have protections, like LGBTQ community having certain rights, women's rights in India that have come so far, haven't come far in the laws of Jammu and Kashmir. So including Jammu and Kashmir as, making it official that Jammu and Kashmir is part of India really does a lot to make sure that the people, the citizens of that land have their basic rights. And that's something that's really tremendous. And again, I'd really like to see, more exploration of and for the international community to be able to open their eyes to the challenges that Jammu and Kashmir, the people of Jammu and Kashmir have faced overall over time, and what the practical solutions are, not just in terms of rhetoric, but in actually helping people with their day-to-day problems and the persecution they face on a regular basis.
Ma'am, as you're saying that after 3 decades of the horrors that have continued in the valley, people are resettling themselves. But I would like to understand that many attacks still continue on Kashmiri Hindus. What has been the reason of the same, even after so much time has passed? And why it is so hard to curb the terror?
I think the reason why it's hard to curb terror in Kashmir is the same reason it's hard to curb terror around the world and extremist activity around the world. So I won't get into too much detail about that. But it's a very similar situation where there are extremists here. They're trying to drive out the indigenous communities and make them force themselves not only to be the majority but to be the only people in that land. These extremist ideologies, which we could call Islamism, which is a political form of Islam. It's not the religion itself, but it's this idea that you know, Islam should be the form of government, should be the form of rule in a land. That idea, and when it's paired with certain styles of extremism, are very, very dangerous. So I think overall there's an interest in deciding the fate of Kashmir rather than letting Kashmiris decide their fate. And this has been obvious for decades and decades, as you can see. When Kashmir, the Kashmiri rulers asked for help in 1947, and again when India asked for a plebiscite, which would have allowed the Kashmiris to vote on what country they would have been a part of. Now, if India is going to the United Nations with such a thing, and Pakistan was also in agreement, it really shows that there was a level of confidence of what the people would decide. There's also respect if we're going to allow people of a region, the international community is going to allow the people of a specific land to decide their own fate. And I think that's something that continuously has been ignored by these extremist factions, which has been, again, coming from Pakistan in order to try and take hold of Kashmir and create unrest in Kashmir, and also unrest throughout India, because extremist activity in Kashmir has affected the rest of India and the entire region of South Asia, which has been extremely detrimental in long-term peace and ensuring the safety and security of citizens of all the countries of South Asia. So there's much to say on why the extremist violence hasn't abated, but I think we've certainly seen an increase in violence in 2021 with the Taliban takeover of Afghanistan. Geopolitical, if something happens in one area, if there's a geopolitical consequences throughout the surrounding areas. So if something happens in Afghanistan, then Pakistan, India, and other countries will also be affected. And we definitely see this with Jammu and Kashmir, that the extremist forces are again being encouraged by the Taliban takeover in Afghanistan. And these geopolitical consequences are something that are very unfortunate and that require international, I think, compassion. It's not attention. There's enough attention on Jammu and Kashmir that is focusing on rhetoric, but we, as thinking about looking towards human rights, we need to focus on the actual problems and actual solutions, and not just how people might identify, or who we can sympathize with, who we shouldn't sympathize with. The reality is that people are being killed. Hindus and Sikhs are being targeted right now in Jammu and Kashmir, specifically Kashmir in particular. And that's something that needs to, that's something that Article 370 and 35A could have helped with. But again, the consequences of the Taliban takeover in Afghanistan will continue to reverberate across the region. And so we have to continue to advocate for all people in Jammu and Kashmir, and especially ask our respective governments to take action to reduce extremist terrorist activity, regardless of where it's taking place.
Ma'am, as you also are mentioning about the ignorance of the various government, I would like to go back to the history. If we talk about 1990, so do you think that the genocide of Kashmiri Hindus were a lot of ignored because they were in majority in nation?
Sorry, can you say that question again, the end part of it?
Yeah. Do you think that this has been lot ignored in their very own nation just because they were in majority? If we talk about Hindu majority.
Yeah, so that idea of a Hindu majority is a complex one. And again, I'm not using the word genocide. There's, so I'll let you use the words you want to use, but I hope people will take what I'm saying at face value. So for a long time, from 1947 up until recent decades, the Indian governments, and they have been various different governments that have been in power, regardless of whether it was Congress or another party that had taken this stand and had been leading India. There was this concerted effort to distance India from this idea of being Hindu. And we see this not only with the situation of Kashmiri Hindus in 1990, but also with the Bengali Hindu genocide, and that, yes, I would call a genocide, in 1971. These are just two examples where there was severe forms of violence, and it was overlooked by the Indian government. The Indian government was very reluctant to intervene. It did, in the end, intervene in a more than 9-month war between Bangladesh and Pakistan, and that's what put an end to Bangladesh and Pakistan being one country and becoming two. Then the two-nation theory was dead. Now there's three countries. Now the situation has, in my opinion, been overlooked by India for a variety of reasons. One of them is interest in promoting this identity of being a secular country, and this has sometimes been at the detriment to this Hindu communities that have been facing persecution, not only in neighboring countries, but within the country itself. So again, I must speak about the countless refugees in the country of India that have not been able to get citizenship, which, if they're not able to work, they're also not able to then get access to any of government resources that would be targeting those in poverty, such as access to water, access to healthcare, access to education, and countless other services. So they're really being persecuted in neighboring countries and then not being able to get citizenship here and get access to basic resources. It's a terrible situation for Hindu and other minority religions in neighboring countries such as Buddhism and Sikhism. And this is something that has escaped international attention. And of course, we imagine that with the CAA, it has not escaped the current government, Indian government's attention, but that's not how Hindu refugees are feeling right now. It's been quite many times the CAA they've asked for an extension, and it has been ignored. The situation of Hindu refugees isn't known. If you talk to Indians, today and ask them about the situation of refugees in their country, it may not be very well known. And that's the same with the Hindu community internationally, which I can speak to a little bit better, as that's who I'm advocating for, is Hindus internationally. As a Hindu American, the situation of Hindus in India that have been persecuted, such as in Jammu and Kashmir, such as the refugees in the past and the present, has been something that has continuously been overlooked. It could be because of the idea of it's a Hindu majority, but I would actually place the fault in the idea of wanting to be secular and being afraid of identifying as Hindu, because then identifying as Hindu would create internal problems in the country, and that's not something India wanted. And although being a secular country is an admirable goal, it's something I'm a part of. My country, the United States, is also a secular country, and I enjoy so much religious freedom there. It's something that this tightrope walk between wanting to be known as secular and not wanting to be known as Hindu has actually resulted in this idea that now, today, that India is a Hindu nation. And of course, legally it's not. But the fact of the matter is, Hindus in the country, as far as I can see, for refugees and other persecuted groups, such as in Jammu and Kashmir, aren't getting the support that they need because of this trepidation that still exists. I would even argue for the present government. So there's a lot to address in terms of the persecution of Hindus, not only in Pakistan, in Bangladesh, and the Union Territory, now the state of Jammu and Kashmir, but also for Hindus within the country that have come as refugees who are still not getting the support that they need. Thank you so much. So that actually came out very warped for me. I'm not sure if the audience was able to hear it. I heard it, it sounded a little off. I wasn't able to hear everything you said, but I did hear you mouth the words thank you. So I'm going to take that as my cue to leave. And also thank you so much for having me. Namaste.